Luxor isn't just a city, it's thousands of years of history literally layered on top of each other. Pharaohs built over the monuments of earlier rulers, ancient temples were transformed by later civilizations, and every corner seems to reveal another incredible story.
On the east bank, the ancient Egyptians built their temples to the gods and celebrated life. Across the Nile to the west bank, everything changes. This is where the pharaohs built their tombs and prepared for the afterlife.
We're David and Annie, and we've picked our top 9 things you really shouldn't miss when visiting Luxor. Number 9, the Nile and Luxor Corniche. Let's start our countdown with something that isn't an ancient monument, but without it, none of the incredible history surrounding Luxor would exist: the River Nile.
One of the nicest ways to experience the River Nile is simply to walk along the Corniche. Watch the boats passing by or take a traditional felucca ride. We took out a motor launch as there was not enough wind to sail and still thoroughly enjoyed the experience.
Standing beside the Nile today, it's easy to forget just how important this river was to the ancient Egyptians. Every year the river would flood, depositing rich, fertile soil onto the surrounding land.
This created a narrow strip of green farmland surrounded by the desert. It was along this corridor that Egyptian civilization developed and flourished. The ancient Egyptians didn't just live beside the Nile, their entire way of life was connected to it.
Number 8, Luxor Museum.
When you're visiting Egypt, there's a large number of museums you could potentially visit. And after seeing temples and tombs and archaeological sites all day, you might be tempted to think you've probably seen enough ancient Egyptian objects already.
But we found the Luxor Museum well worth including. It's quite small, but it was a very hot day when we visited, so it also gave some relief just to spend some time looking at some incredible artifacts. One of the things we particularly liked is that it doesn't feel as overwhelming as some of the larger museums.
The museum concentrates on a carefully selected collection of important pieces. Among the highlights are beautifully preserved statues, jewellery and other archaeological discoveries.
Number 7, the Colossi of Memnon. At number 7 are 2 of the most recognisable statues in Luxor, the Colossi of Memnon. These 2 18-metre high stone figures are all that remains of what was once a vast mortuary temple built for Pharaoh Amenhotep III, who ruled Egypt during the 18th dynasty around the 14th century BC.
They were originally positioned at the entrance to a huge temple complex dedicated to the worship of the deceased pharaoh, but unfortunately very little of that temple remains today.
The statues also have a fascinating connection with the Romans. One of them was damaged by an earthquake and developed a reputation for making a mysterious singing or whistling sound. Even the Roman Emperor Hadrian is said to have travelled to hear the famous sound. Unfortunately, when the statues were repaired, the sound apparently stopped. Number 6, the Temple of Hatshepsut. Even before you know the history behind it, the location makes this one of the most spectacular places to visit in Luxor. The temple is built against a dramatic wall of limestone cliffs with enormous terraces rising up from the desert floor.
But the story of Hatshepsut is fascinating. Hatshepsut became the regent for her young stepson, Thutmose III, and after the death of her husband, rather than eventually stepping aside and allowing him to take full control, she took on the role of pharaoh herself. This was an extraordinary decision in a society where Egypt was traditionally ruled by male pharaohs.
Hatshepsut's reign was largely peaceful and prosperous, and she became known for ambitious building projects and successful trading expeditions. One of the most famous is the expedition to the mysterious land of Punt, which is depicted in reliefs at her temple. The expedition returned with valuable goods including incense, exotic plants and other treasures.
Unfortunately, Hatshepsut's legacy became complicated after her death. For many centuries, much of her story is forgotten or misunderstood, until archaeologists began piecing together the evidence and recognising just how important her reign had been.
Today, her temple is a reminder of one of the most remarkable women in ancient Egyptian history. And when you stand back and look at the building against the cliffs, you can understand why she chose this extraordinary location to make her mark on history. Number 5, the Valley of the Queens.
Whilst the Valley of the Kings tends to receive most of the attention, the Valley of the Queens is equally fascinating and gives us a different perspective on the royal families of ancient Egypt. It's also a much quieter sight.
The Valley of the Queens was used primarily during the New Kingdom as a burial place for queens, princes, and other members of the royal family. More than 90 tombs have been identified here, although not all of them are open to visitors. These tombs were designed to help the deceased make the journey into the afterlife, and many were decorated with beautifully painted scenes showing the dead person meeting the gods.
The paintings inside are incredibly detailed with vibrant colours that have survived for more than 3,000 years. Seeing the photographs and footage doesn't quite prepare you for the level of detail. Every wall is telling a different part of the story. They had religious meaning and they were intended to help in the afterlife.
If you're planning to visit, it's worth checking which tombs are open at the time of your trip, as access can change and some of the most famous tombs require an additional ticket. But if you have the time, we definitely think the Valley of the Queens is worth adding to your Luxor itinerary. Number 4, a hot air balloon ride over Luxor. For something completely different, a hot air balloon ride over Luxor. We unfortunately couldn't do this as a couple of our children are scared of heights, but we went out at sunrise from our apartment to see these amazing balloons take off.
We heard that you get incredible views across the West Bank. From the air, you can see the contrast between the fertile green landscape around the Nile and the dry deserts and mountains beyond. You can also appreciate just how close together many of the ancient sites actually are.
Number 3, Luxor Temple.
We visited Luxor Temple at night, and unlike some of the temples in Egypt that were dedicated primarily to one particular god, Luxor Temple was closely connected with the rejuvenation and kingship and religious rituals surrounding the pharaoh.
The temple was developed over many generations, with some of the most important work taking place under Amenhotep III and Ramesses II. As a result, you can see the influence of different rulers throughout the complex. There are enormous statues, columns, obelisks, and inscriptions, all telling us something about the people who built and expanded this extraordinary place.
One of the most fascinating things about Luxor Temple is how it continued to be important long after the ancient Egyptian civilization had changed. Parts of the complex were later used by the Romans, and a Christian church was also built within the temple. This layering of history is something you see repeatedly throughout Egypt.
And then there is the Avenue of Sphinxes, which historically connected Luxor Temple with the much larger Karnak Temple complex. Imagine this area thousands of years ago, with processions moving along the avenue and statues lining the route. Number 2, Karnak Temple complex.
Karnak Temple is where the scale of ancient Egyptian architecture really starts to become almost impossible to comprehend. Karnak isn't simply one temple, it's a vast complex that was developed over a period of roughly 2,000 years, with successive pharaohs adding their own buildings, statues and monuments.
One of the most impressive areas is the Great Hypostyle Hall. This enormous space contains 134 massive columns, many of them covered in hieroglyphics and beautifully detailed carvings. The largest columns are around 21 meters high, which is roughly the height of a 7-story building.
Just imagine the work that went into creating this. Thousands of people would have been involved in the quarrying, transporting and carving of the stone. When you look at Karnak today, you're looking at the result of generations of work.
You can walk through the complex and find yourself surrounded by enormous columns, ancient statues and walls covered in hieroglyphics. And every few minutes you notice another detail you hadn't seen before. Number 1, the Valley of the Kings.
And finally, at number 1, we have the Valley of the Kings. This is probably the place that most people immediately think of when they hear the word Luxor. And after visiting, it's easy to understand why.
For around 500 years during the New Kingdom period, this remote valley became the final resting place for Egypt's pharaohs. This was a major change from the earlier tradition of building enormous pyramids. Instead of placing royal tombs prominently in the landscape, the rulers of the New Kingdom chose to hide their tombs deep within the mountains.
The idea was to protect the pharaohs and their treasures from tomb robbers, although unfortunately many of the tombs were eventually discovered and looted. More than 60 tombs and chambers have now been identified in the valley, belonging to some of the most important rulers in Egyptian history.
And of course, the most famous discovery was the tomb of Tutankhamun. When Howard Carter discovered the tomb in 1922, it was remarkably well preserved and contained thousands of objects, including the famous burial mask. Tutankhamun himself wasn't one of Egypt's most powerful pharaohs. In fact, he was a relatively young king who died at around the age of 19.
But the discovery of his tomb transformed him into one of the most famous people in the ancient world. The treasures found inside captured the imagination of people around the globe and helped create modern fascination with Egypt that continues today.
The Valley of the Kings also contains the tombs of much more powerful rulers. The walls are covered with religious texts and scenes designed to guide the pharaoh through the dangerous journey into the afterlife. The ancient Egyptians believed that death was not the end, but the beginning of another journey. And the tomb was designed to help the deceased navigate that journey successfully.
If this guide has helped you plan your own Egyptian adventure, please don't forget to subscribe to Near and Far Adventures